So, Madam Speaker, not to put too fine a point on it then, when the monies which are the result of this amendment come to be spent, the people of Marco City are not to be the beneficiaries of these funds, I suggest, since the opposition doesn't support it.
It's a pity your power don't reach that far.
I guess that's what it means. I'm only thinking on my feet, you know.
Still starts off with a threat.
Yeah.
Welcome to politics. Here's a threat.
So there's that, and this is money to keep the country going and to make sure that the public servants get paid and to make sure that the Ministry of Education has the funds and to make sure those people in Inagua get the buildings they need and the roads to be fixed. And the leader of the opposition says, I don't support it. Very good, very good. For the record, no law has been broken. No policy has been violated. You can preach doom and gloom all you wish. I suppose that's the modus operandi of the side opposite. But at the end of the day, the country is going to progress. The monies will be properly allocated for the funds which are approved by Parliament, and life will go on. The central bank is put in this position, I think, because in the days of Hubert Ingram's administration, the Central Bank Act was changed to give it autonomy. And autonomy is a very interesting thing because for a country to survive, Madam Speaker, I always thought that there ought to be synergy between fiscal policy, that is, that conducted out of the Ministry of Finance, and policies from the central bank, which deals with monetary policy. And although the Ministry of Finance does not control the central bank, you'd want those two agencies to be working together for the forward progress of the country. Now, as I understand it, the way things are now constructed, the central bank is autonomous from the Ministry of Finance and from the actions of the Minister of Finance and from the government itself entirely. And the closest you get to influencing policies of the central bank is, of course, by your appointment to the members of the board. But it seems to me that a central banker ought to always be looking at ensuring that there's this synergy between fiscal and monetary policy. It may be, therefore, that some future government might have to look again at the way the entire act is structured so that there is a continuation of this synergy between the two. I don't think we've reached that point yet. But what I would really like to address and why I asked for permission to speak here this morning is because the central bank also has another role, and that role, in addition to the monetary policy, and by monetary policy it means maintaining the value of the Bahamian dollar. And in sum, the value of the Bahamian dollar is maintained. It's a derived value. It's derived by the amount of US dollars which the central bank has in its reserves. And so every Bahamian government tries to make sure that there are as many US dollars in the reserves as possible. I think the last I heard it was 2 billion or somewhere around there. And each Bahamian dollar in the economy is supported by 1 US dollar sitting in the central bank. And that's the way we were able to get goods and services from overseas. So that's their role, their main role in the banking sector. And that's the issue which I would like to raise today. I can tell you that my constituents are agitated to no end about the regulation or the lack thereof of regulation of the banking sector in this country. That we have, over the past decade, presided over the debanking of communities from north to south in the country. We have presided over the depersonalization of services in the banking sector. We have presided over the increase in costs of services and the lessening of those services. We have complained and screamed and shouted and done whatever we can to reverse this trend. We've appealed to the regulator, and nothing has changed that path or that pattern. And so the relevance of my debate today is to do what I can in terms of my voice to make a public appeal with regard to this. I've spoken to the governor of the central bank. I know the angst and the pain in the communities like North Andros, where there's no bank. And where else? Andros. Where else? Long Island. Crooked Island, of course, has never had one. But I always thought, certainly during Lyndon Pindling's time, that there was a bargain made with the banks. You make money in New Providence, hand over fist. And in exchange, you put banks in these rural communities so that these people can have access to banking services. But that social contract seems to have collapsed. And it appears that the central bank, who is the regulator, is unable to reverse that trend. The question is, what do we do? Several Bahamians have tried to get banking licenses themselves. And they can't even get banking licenses from the central bank. Well, we've had a year and a half at it, so.
You had 5 years before that time, and then 5 years before that.
Yeah, I hear what you say. I hear what you
I
say.
agree with you, but
I hear what you say. But I started off, no, we started off. We started off by, no, we started off by saying, we started off by saying, they passed a law which gave autonomy to the central bank. So the PLP had nothing to do with whether the license was obtained or not.
I forgot you are like the controllers.
You know,
My bad.
it got nothing to do with control. It's about sensible public policy. Sensible public policy. That's what this is about. You know. And then, you know, every day you wake up. I actually don't know what to do now if somebody writes me a check. What do I do with it? Can I actually go in the bank and deposit it?
Overseas account.
Contributed to victims of crime.
Overseas account.
I might contribute it to your election account. Yeah.
By all means, you take it.
It would be a modest contribution, I assure you. Yeah. But anything to stop menace. Anything to stop menace. So the lady, because, and I start with checks because I'm sorry to use this expression, Madam Speaker, but I consider it really a fool's errand to be hiring a consultant for 2 years, as I understand it, to convince us why we shouldn't be writing checks. Because I gather the next thing on the chopping block is checks. We are supposed to stop writing checks. Now, the technology exists right now in the United States. My sister showed me how to do it, how she does it. You get a check, you take the phone, take a picture, goes to your bank, instant money into your account. No issue. Or you walk up to the ATM, put the check through the thing, instant money into your account. So why would we be talking about we can stop writing checks, or we going to ban the writing of checks? And then to hire a consultant to do that over 2 years, to teach us why we shouldn't be writing checks. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense to me. And what is it? It costs now, you put money into it, you give somebody a check now, they try and put it in their account, it costs $10 for you to put your own money in the bank. And the services just seem to deteriorate. The one that really annoys Bahamians is when you dial on the phone, you can't get anybody in the bank to answer the phone.
No.
From the Bahamas to answer.
That's right, the phone is being answered by someone somewhere else. And you say, someone must be able to deal with this as an issue because people are just getting annoyed about it. So one of the solutions to this problem might be that the legislature is going to have to intervene. There's a man named Charles Fox of now blessed memory who in the early 70s had a Consumer Protection Association. And in this country, the NGOs have more or less disappeared that used to exist in the post-independence period. But one of the aspects of the work of that organization was to advocate for consumer protection. And I'm wondering now whether the answer to this is not to separate the regulatory functions from the monetary functions of the bank, and doing some things like ensuring that there is Bahamian content in banking, so that when a customer of a bank needs to find out something from the bank, that they have a right to speak to someone in person. Not someone on the phone, but someone in person. And they have a right to speak to someone in person in the Bahamas. Maybe that's something that can be supplied by statute. Don't know. And then maybe one has to look at capping the charges that can be brought for services being advanced by what is, after all, a public good. Maybe. Maybe the legislature can indicate that by statute. But what would be preferable, I think, is if the banking sector and the central bank got the message. And if the opposition, I don't know if anybody else plans to speak, would simply say, I heard you say from your seat that you agree with some of what I said.
In the first corner, we were here that we should have a bipartisan approach to address that.
Great, I love it.
Kumbaya.
Yes. Let's hold hands and sing together Kumbaya on this. And I think maybe that would be a useful thing to do. But I just want to mark again, Madam Speaker, that this, as far as I'm concerned, is a really serious problem. And I would wish that some solutions are coming quickly. I know that some entrepreneurs are now working with certain of the banks and with the government with the idea of creating banking agencies, which is a new form of financial services where the banks themselves have representatives in various islands. But if we can move to that way, I think that's done in the Dominican Republic. I think if we can do that, that might rectify some of the issues of these communities that are being debanked or have been debanked, and provide the liquidity which is necessary for communities to be able to survive on a daily basis. So that's the main thing I wanted to raise here today. I am a fierce consumer advocate in this matter, that these communities need these services, and that Bahamians ought to be respected in their own country by these institutions that have made a fortune in this country. And there's nothing, in my view, which justifies the charges, the level of charges that are being imposed upon Bahamian consumers for B-dollar banking in this country. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, that there is someone who actually listens in the regulatory bodies to dealing with these matters. We can argue the esoteric points about deficits and whether we had the right to draw down on the special drawing rights, but it was Hilary Beckles who made the point when he argues on the point of reparations. And you know, we're always being lectured, all of our societies across the region are being lectured about how we have these huge debts and the debts are unsustainable and we should really be more responsible. You know, poor Jamaica has been into the IMF's hands about 2 or 3 times since independence. The last time was the housing bubble, which took place, I guess, that was in and around 2008. And you know, Jamaica had then something like 2.4 billion US in their reserves. P.J. Patterson may have been the prime minister at the time. And he told me that, you know, there was this housing bubble, housing market collapse, largely because of speculation in the private sector. But what was the government to do? And he said they were betwixt and between as to what to do. But he said he's coming out of his party's convention, and as he's walking out of the convention, one of his big supporters from one of the rural parishes in Jamaica walked up to him and said, "Prime, I don't want to hear anything. I want my money. I want my money." He said he got his marching orders. So the government of Jamaica had to step in, created FinSAC, and they essentially bought up all the bad debt. The result was the collapse of their reserves and back into the hands of the IMF. Before that, as I was saying, Hilary Beckles makes the point that, you know, when the British handed off independence to our countries, they gave the impression that they just seamlessly handed these wonderfully run countries to us with no debt and everything was going so smoothly. Except in some of our countries, Jamaica, again, the obvious example where the literacy rate or the literacy rate was something like 10, 12, 15%. Most people in Jamaica couldn't read at independence. So the government had to spend money on education. And what do you do to develop a country? If you ain't got the money in the treasury, you got to borrow it. So that's why I say philosophically with our countries, we can get as sanctimonious as we want about debt and, you know, bow down to all of this stuff. But this country has a problem with poverty right now. The Central Bank of the Bahamas did a survey in December of 2018, and it said of people who are making $30,000 a year or less in this country, 50% of them could not make ends meet at the end of the month. 50%. And how were they making it? They were making it by borrowing from family or friends or working her foreign employer in this country told her that they would not allow anybody in their employ in this country to be paid less than $500 a week, because they didn't see how anyone making less than that could actually make it in this country on a weekly basis. And we see it in my constituency where people have to go to the market, not weekly, not weekly, but you go daily and you buy $20 here, $10 there. That's how people are making it. And when the dead die, you can't bury the dead because you don't have the funds to do it. When you fall ill, God help you, because you don't have the funds to buy the medication. So there's poverty, extreme poverty, which we have to deal with. The only way, in my view, to deal with this is development. And how do you develop? You've got to build things. You have to expand. And we know that almost 50% of the national debt of this country is due to weather-related functions. Not all these things about people keep throwing about corruption and mismanagement and all of these things. They're structural. The fact that we are a small island developing state and we have to face bad weather difficulties and we have to spend a fortune to catch up. And because we have a GDP per capita, which is where it's in the 30s, $33,000 or $34,000 a year per person, we can't qualify for the concessionary loans to fix the problems. So there are a lot of structural issues which cause us to be where we are. And that's why I caution even my own colleagues, this holy grail about deficits and all the rest of it. The expression, the grass is getting greener, but the cow is starving. That's the issue we face. Right now, people have to survive. And we have to put in place a set of policies. You do not agree with us, obviously, because you're on the opposition side. But the country's been not served well by 5 years here and 5 years there and 5 years here and 5 years there, because there's been no sustainable policy. As soon as you come in, you revoke everything we do. And then as soon as we come in, then we say, well, that wasn't the way it should have gone. So what we need, in my view, and I'm arguing again on my feet, is we need a period of stability, which means that the people of the country are going to be asked to support us again, to provide that stability for the country.
The only way.
And
Just
there will be, Madam Speaker, there'll be hiccups, and there'll be unforced errors. Of course there will be. But what the people of the country will know is that we are dedicated to the national development. We're dedicated to consultation with those who are our opponents, because we believe that there ought to be, as far as possible, consensus building in the way the country develops and goes forward. So that's the way to properly operate this country. So I don't want people to get the impression, I was sitting here, and I always say doom and gloom, preaching doom and gloom. Let's not preach doom and gloom, because everything we know about the way the country has developed from the past is that whatever the news is, whether it's good or bad, the country has continued to progress. And one of the issues we're going to face now is this thorny problem of what to do about the young people and their development to stop the issues which arise out of conflict resolution and the lack thereof. How do we do that? Well, obviously, the Minister of Education's portion of the budget has got to have much, much more. As I've said, going around the country, there is nothing that I see that money can't resolve. And this is why this amendment is important, because it is a management tool to give us the resources which we need, the funds we need to run the country. And not frighten people about, the money's, this is unlawful, this is illegal, you've broken the law. Nobody's broken the law. Nobody's broken any law. And so I hope that the whole House supports this amendment. And I hope that what we remember in all of this, Madam Speaker, is where I started. There's fiscal policy and there's monetary policy. To me, there ought to be a synergy between the two of them, so the Ministry of Finance and the central bank are on the same page. Secondly, to deal with the question of monetary policy, the main job of the central bank is just make sure that the Bahamian dollar maintains its value. And it's doing so far a good job with that. The regulatory part, though, is the issue which concerns us. The depersonalization which has happened in banking in this country, the fact that there seems to have been a de-Bahamianization of banking functions in this country, including the approval of credit, and to ensure that the level of services are at an appropriate price point so that people are not being gouged for what is, after all, a public good, and then to resolve the issue of the debanking of these rural communities where people are suffering because they can't keep cash in the economy because there are not banks in those areas. So those are issues on behalf of the constituents of Fox Hill I raised today. I hope that those who have ears to hear will hear. And I hope that it does not become necessary for us to have a formal approach by petition of my constituents to change the public policy with regard to the legislative regime on regulation, that the preferred way to do this is for us to sit around on a bipartisan basis and map some way forward in these matters. With those few words, Madam Speaker,
The chair recognizes the Honorable